Hi, welcome to Operations Management. The topic of this lecture is process strategy. We learned the first topic in the last lecture, and in this part, we'll cover the second part, the method of process strategy. The starting point should be the value. What value do you intend to create through that process? What are you trying to achieve through this operation? This must be sufficiently discussed before embarking on process design or improvement, because all have to agree on the value together. Always ask this question: what value does this process create? What value do we want to create for the customers through this process? Those questions has to be asked before embarking on process design. The first tool that I want to introduce to you is SIPOC, or process mapping. One of the most important things in process improvement is to understand where value is created. Process analysis is a basic skill you need to understand how a business operates. You can obtain great insight by drawing a simple flow chart showing the flow of materials or information through an enterprise. A manager should be able to understand which activity is creating value and which is not. To do so, one should be able to construct a process map that consists of suppliers, inputs, processes, outputs, and customers, called SIPOC. In particular, the manager should focus on how inputs are transformed in details and find a way to eliminate non-value-adding activities and have all the resources spent for value-adding activities. So to reiterate, here's the process, and in this process, processes are broken down into sub-levels, and the interrelationships are drawn here. And not only those processes, but also related inputs and output are specified in this SIPOC, along with the suppliers and customers. So this one gives you an overall picture of a process together. One simple example of process mapping would be oil change process. Take a look at this traditional process. Conventionally, a person drops off the car at a car dealer and bring it back at the end of the day. It can take as long as 8 hours to finish the job. Getting a ride back and forth could be a pain, and having no transportation limit one's capability to get business or personal tasks done. Car dealer B understands this limitation and analyzed the existing process and proposed simpler processes. So in this process, instead of dropping off the car, the dealer allowed the customer to drive into loop area and instantly write up an order and have the oil change done promptly on the spot, like a zippy loop. The job is done quite promptly. From 8 hours of work, the work time or throughput time was reduced to 30 minutes. Another car dealer came up with even better idea. The dealer regarded ordering and paying as non-value adding activities that is happening inside of the shop. So he tried to remove this ordering and paying out of their process. The result is that the driver can pay while the oil is being changed and drive off after the work is done right away. Or they can use paying beforehand, right? Of course, the dealer should be able to charge higher premium for the speedy service. And after eliminating all the non-value adding tasks, the dealer is more efficient and positioned to charge higher price to the customer. So here's another example of oil change process mapping and improvement. The second tool that we would like to discuss is spaghetti diagram. Spaghetti diagram is a great tool to understand value-adding activities. The idea is to observe and understand how things and people are moving on to the current process. While things and people are moving around the work floor or warehouse, it's helpful to minimize the movement and make it as efficient as it is possible. To do so, one can come to the place and observe what is happening in that place for a day or two and record the movement of the people, inventory, equipment, and so forth. Then draw a spaghetti diagram, and that helps them to understand the flow of goods and services and people all together. That's the goal of spaghetti diagram. Here is an example. Before grouping, a person drew this spaghetti diagram. This figure is an example of jumbled flows described by spaghetti diagram. Goods are in movement constantly. The process consists of receiving and lading and drilling and milling and assembly and grinding and shipping. So this process is somewhat complicated. If you observe this as an operations manager, you may want to analyze carefully and try to find a way to improve it and make it flow better. This is an improved version of the process. You can notice the difference between the previous one and the current one. Before, it was a circular format, but now it is much more linear. Another suggestion is that it divided and spread mixed workshops into different lines. Instead of having multiple lines by groups, it divided workflows by lines and product, and the improvement was made. Before, the process had been grouped into one function, such as drilling and lading and milling, but now it's by a product or job nature. As a result, the process is much more product specific and reduces movement of goods and people significantly. This process mapping adds value to the jobs to be done, and the initial spaghetti diagram served the purpose of improvement. The third method is theory of constraints. This method was developed by Eliyahu Goldratt, and he wrote a book called The Goal, and the book delves into this topic. And I encourage you to check it out, as it is very well written in a novel format. So look at this work system, and it has work center A and B and C, so 3 workshops, and it's a sequential workshop. So we have to look at these 3 workshops all together to analyze the entire system. And we see that the capacity or work rate for workshop A is 200 products per hour, and workshop B is 50 per hour, and work center C is 200 per hour. What does that mean? It means that workshop A and BC are constrained by the efficiency of workshop B, right? Although workshop A can produce 200 per hour, they cannot move on to the next process unless the capacity for B is enlarged. In the same way, workshop C has the capability of 200 per hour, but it will be running only 50 of them per hour and produce 50 of them. That's only quarter percent of the capacity. So in a nutshell, and as you look at the entire system, we realize that this process is limited by work center B. So theory of constraints say that when we are looking at the entire system, the system is limited by the weakest link of the system. So in order to increase the efficiency of the entire system, we have to examine each constraint one by one and try to lift up the constraints so that the entire system can run much better. Say if a manager is focusing on improving work center A and C and supply more money for that, that will not work very well because work center B is not improved. So the resources have to be supplied to work center B rather than A or C. So that's the nutshell of theory of constraints. A constraint is any factor that limits the organization from getting more of whatever it strives for, which is usually profit. The goal focuses on constraints as bottleneck processes in a job shop, manufacturing organization, or any other service elements as well. So far, we have learned the tools of process improvement. When we are looking back, we need to ask 3 questions. The first question is, where is value? Always start with the value that the operation or process intends to create. Is it quality, time, convenience, or flexibility? Is it low cost or student satisfaction? We want to create a value that works for the company. The other side of the coin is non-value adding activity. So you should ask, where are non-value adding activities? Sometimes there are 2 types of non-value adding activities, necessary and non-necessary activities. In purchasing equipment, a person might have to go through all levels of hierarchy. That's unnecessary. Going through a few relevant review layers is a necessary process, but they are non-value adding activities. If everything is done right the first time, it does not have to go through all layers of approval processes. The third question that you want to ask is, where is the bottleneck? According to the theory of constraint, the throughput time of the entire process depends on the speed of the weakest link. One needs to look at such bottlenecks carefully and look for methods to lift the constraints up. In summary, we have learned why process strategy is important and how to improve it. It is important because process is one of 3 pillars in business over which managers have a lot of control. Once embedded, it carries a long-term implications, and when designed carefully, it can create competitive advantage. That's why it's significant. The second topic was how to design a process. There are many good tools available. One of the most important one is process mapping. In other words, you want to understand where the value is being created and where non-value adding activities are lying in. You want to focus on value adding activities and eliminate non-value adding activities. SIPOC analysis and spaghetti diagram and value mapping are good tools. We also discussed theory of constraints, in which we learned that we need to focus on the weakest link to improve the entire process. I hope you learned something valuable in this lecture. Thank you.